This is Mushtaq from the Center of Central Asian Studies, University of Kashmir. I welcome you all to the UGC lecture series on Central Asia. In the previous few lectures, we had an occasion to discuss and to profile Central Asia in diverse respects, and one of the important characteristics that we discussed in the previous lectures was that the region was having what is called as the Silk Route. The Silk Route, as we argued in the last lectures, did not define a single route, but it defined a number of the routes, and because of which this route had become transcontinental in its frame and character and organization as well. Therefore, this transcontinental Silk Route, although it had become famous after the most lustrous Chinese product of the silk, but at the same time there were many other precious commodities which were produced in and around the area, which had also subsequently become a part of the commodity exchange structure along the Silk Route. And to say in a way that this Silk Route was transcontinental on the one hand, and at the same time was very wide in its commodity exchange structure, and as such was linked with the most prestigious civilizations, like we have had the Indian civilization, we had the Mesopotamian civilization, we had the Assyrian civilization, and we had the Roman civilization and the like. Therefore, we should say that Silk Route did not define a major highway, but it defined a network, or rather a web of the meandering trade routes that traversed the most inhospitable mountains and forests, the mountains like the Tian Shan Mountain, Kunlun Mountain, the Pamirs, the Karakoram, and several other sub-mountains that existed within the geophysical frame of the Euro-Asian or the Central Asian region. The Silk Route also went along what we called as the most productive, the fertile oases, like we had Samarkand, Bukhara, Marav, Kashgar, Khotan, Yarkand, etc. The Silk Route also passed through what we should say the deserted, the most dreaded deserts, like we have the Taklamakan Desert and we have the Gobi Desert, about which there are the historical evidences which say that these were not the deserts, but rather these were the sea of death points, and which most of the time was swallowed up the bypassers, the merchants, and the caravanserais. So my point is that the Silk Route in itself defined, of course, what we say the major highway, but it had also the contributories, and those contributories passed through some of the countries in the neighborhood, and or the parts of the countries in the neighborhood, and incidentally some of the branch routes passed through Kashmir as well. And there was a reason that Kashmir was very closely linked to Central Asia and China. It was fairly close and it was fairly near, and it is said that Kashmir's position was such that one could reach to Tajikistan in western part of Central Asia after traveling only 50 or more kilometers to reach to that spot on the one hand. And on the other hand, it is said that for reaching to Khotan, Yarkand, and Kashgar, which presently falls within the Chinese part of Central Asia, it would take us only few days together to reach out to that place. So one can suppose and one can guess that Kashmir's geographical position was beneficial for Kashmir, India on the one hand, Central Asia and China on the other hand. And because of the geographical proximity, we had a number of the link routes or the branch routes that would enter Kashmir at several points while crossing some of the most perilous passes and some of the most dreaded passes along the Kunlun, along the Karakoram, along the Pamirs, and the Hindu Kush also. To take you to the map, I show you that this entire part is presently under China, and it was basically a part of the Turkestan, but it is presently controlled by China, and this part is called as Xinjiang, and it is characteristic of some major towns like Kashgar is here, Yarkand is here, Khotan is here. There are many other such towns housed in this Uyghur Xinjiang region. And it is said about this particular region that it was connected to Kashmir. The merchants and the travelers, after crossing the Kunlun mountains here, they would cross the Karakoram here, they would reach to Nubra Valley in Ladakh, and then there was similar other route which would pass through the Chishul, and it would again join Leh, and this was one part which connected, and onwards it would reach out to proper Leh, then it would go down to Kargil, and it would reach to Srinagar. This was the one route that connected Kashmir with this Chinese part of Central Asia, and from Kashmir onwards the route was connected to Punjab and Sindh, Multan, etc. Another route was through Gilgit. This is the Gilgit area, which is presently controlled by Pakistan, and this very area was also instrumental in keeping the contacts of India and Kashmir with the western part of Central Asia. This part is the eastern part of Central Asia, and this part is the western part of Central Asia. Till 1991 it was under Russia, and it is no more under Russia now, but because new republics have come into existence like Kyrgyzstan, like Uzbekistan, like Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, etc. And once the route would pass through Gilgit, it would come through the Wakhan corridor. This was a Wakhan corridor, a corridor which would let into Afghanistan, and sometimes this route would go to Kabul here, and sometimes it would take a right turn, it would reach to Tajikistan, it would go straight and through the Balkh is situated here, onwards it could go to Ashikabad, Turkmenistan, or once again if it would take a turn towards Uzbekistan, it would reach to Tashkent or Samarkand or Bukhara here. This was the another route. Then another route, this route was mostly traversed through Bandipora Gures route. This was called as the Bandipora Gures route. Yet another route was the route that after crossing the Hindu Kush mountains, it would reach to Gandhara, Peshawar, and from Peshawar it would reach to Islamabad, onwards to Muzaffarabad, and then it would link with Srinagar itself. Therefore, these are the major routes that connected India with Central Asia, with China, but it does not mean that there were not also some tiny passes or some tiny routes, but these routes were the major ones, and therefore we find a lot of debate and discussion in the historical accounts that we have available at our disposal. And this historical account is in the form of the literature that is locally available to us, and that is also available at the level of of India. And like, for instance, we have the travel accounts that date back to the ancient times. We have also the travel accounts that pertain to the period of the medieval period, and of course the modern period in the history of Kashmir, and also the history of India as such. And I should say, just to make a mention of the history and just to make a mention of the literary accounts, if we have to study the travel accounts, we cannot miss making a mention of what is called as Kalana's Rajatarangni. We do have the instances of the routes, and we do have the instances of the connections that India and Kashmir had with China and Central Asia. We cannot also ignore making a mention of the Sanskrit sources that are available to us that do make a mention of our connections with the eastern part as well as the western part of Chinese Turkestan. For the medieval period also, we have the references of Jonaraja, Sarivara, Sukha, Prajabhata, all those people who have contributed in compiling what is called as the most momentous work as Rajatarangni, and it is also mentioned in those sources. Then other than these sources, we have the medieval accounts also available at our disposal, which do speak about the connections, like we have Tariq Azmi, Muhammad Azam Dedmari's Tariq Azmi, and which is also sometimes called as Waqiyat-i Kashmir. We have also Mirza Haidar Duglat's Tarikh-i-Kashmiri. We have also the account of Tariq-i-Sayyid Ali, which is the author is anonymous. And similarly, we have the Tarikh-Kashmir by Narayan Kul Ajiz, and we have also the accounts of Gulshan Dastur by Nath Pandit, and we have also the accounts of the Intizami Mulk-i-Kashmir for the Afghan period, and so on and so forth. We have the similar accounts like Baghi Suleiman also, which do tell us about the connections of India and Kashmir with Turkestan or eastern or the western parts of Central Asia. Then going down again, we have the accounts available for the Dogra period also, and we should specially make mention of the Mehta Sher Singh's travel account, which has given a total and complete and absolute narrative of Kashmir's and India's connections with Central Asia. And we cannot also ignore to mention the name of Sfahian of the 5th century and Hivan Sang of the 7th century. So therefore, when these historical accounts are put together and they are later supplemented by the administrative records, official files also, we reach to this conclusion that our connections, the connections of India, the connections of Kashmir date back to early times, the BCs as well as the early ADs. Now these trade routes or the sub-routes, we should not simply take them as the arteries of trade between India, Kashmir and Central Asia, but we should also take them as the transmission channels of the culture and the cultural influences. Because in the last lectures, I did argue that, the impact of Central Asia on the culture of Kashmir has been quite advocate, and in certain cases we do feel that for all practical purposes, rather in terms of our art, architecture, dress, food habits, faith, ideology and similar other parts of the culture, we are more Central Asians than the Kashmiris, and at times it appears that the Kashmiriyat, which we have been often talking about, that it is partly indigenous and partly it is a sort of assimilation of the cultures from the outside world. Having said that, I should further say that there were three fundamental factors that contributed to the connections of India, Kashmir with China and Central Asia. See, we just discussed it first and foremost on the grounds of the politics. When we go to the early BCs, we find out that Kashmir, North India and parts of the upper Oxus and upper Jaxartes, then Afghanistan, then eastern Turkestan, they were a part of a completely centralized political structure that came into being in the early BCs under what we called as the Kushans. And Kushan rule is of course famous in terms of being not only vast, in terms of being a center of the assimilation as well as the radiation of several influences from Central Asia, from Mongolia, from Afghanistan to northern India, including Kashmir as well. And even we should say that even before that also we have the influences of the Scythians, the Parthians, the Greeks as well on the history of Kashmir, and under whom also this entire belt of North India, Kashmir, eastern Turkestan, Afghanistan, upper parts of the Amur river and upper parts of the Sir rivers, which presently constitute Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they did form a part of one single political whole, and because of this political integration, the connections of the Indians and that of the Kashmiris with their Central Asian counterparts were not only established, but they were successfully sustained throughout the history. And thereafter also we find out that during the 5th century AD, we find out the rule of the Hephthalites Huns. They also created a vast empire to which North India and Kashmir was also a part of. And because of this political integration, one can imagine and one can guess that there was a complete freedom in the movement of the people from this and the other side of the Indian borders. And then also going afterwards, we find out that in the history of Kashmir, we have the mention of ruler, most popular ruler of the Karkuta dynasty, whom we called as Laltaditya Muktapedia of the 8th century. About him, it is also said that he created a Turkestan Federation, Pan-Kashmir Turkestan Federation, to which present Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and eastern parts of Chinese Turkestan, North India, and also Afghanistan formed a part thereof. So thereafter also we find out that Kashmir did become a part of Mughal India. At that time also the connections of Mughal India were retained with Balkh, Badakhshan, and similar other parts of Central Asia. But since Kashmir was a Suba or a province, a known province of Mughal India, at that time also the connections of Mughal India, Kashmir, and Central Asia were retained, or they were reinforced, I should say. And thereafter also we have the instance of the Afghan rule in Kashmir, and since Kashmir did form a part of the Afghan rule after 1753, in the middle of the 18th century, we find out that the entire Kashmir was being operated from Kabul itself, and we used to have the Subedars and Deputy Subedars appointed from time to time from Kabul. They would come along with a large number of the people from Afghanistan, and they would, conduct the state of affairs in Kashmir. And thereafter also we find out during the Dogra period as well, Kashmir and India did have the contacts with Central Asia and China. And I should say therefore, to summarily I should submit that political factor was one of the factors that contributed to the establishment and the furtherance of the connections between India, Kashmir, and Central Asia and China. Then equally important factor was the factor of the religious exchanges. We know that religion has played a tremendous role in molding the lives of the people all over the world, and neither India nor Kashmir nor Central Asia can be an exception to it. And India has the privilege, should boast of having produced what should I say as the ancient faith of Buddhism. And although it originated from Bodh Gaya, Bihar, but it reached out to the most remotest parts of Southeast Asia, China, eastern parts of Turkestan, western parts of Turkestan, and Afghanistan, and of course North India as well. So it was that Kashmir played the role of a bridge in the transmission of the ancient Indian faith of Buddhism to Central Asian countries, and the roots which the monks, the priests, the other clergy adopted, these were actually the roots that we discussed a few minutes before. And I should say that these monks and the priests, they would cross these routes and they would reach out to Khotan, Yarkand, Kashgar, Ili, Urumqi, Dunhuang, and China as well, on the one hand towards the east, and they would reach out to Samarkand, Bukhara, Kyrgyzstan, Marov, and similar other parts of the Central Asia and the countries bordering Central Asia as well. Therefore, my point is that the ancient Indian faith of Buddhism was of course transported from India through Kashmir to Central Asia, and the monks and the priests played a significant role. And one interesting feature is that the Kashmiri, Buddhist monks played a significant role to that effect. And we have the instance of Sangadeva, we have the instance of Kumara Jiva. About him, it is said that his father was the Indian, but his mother was a Kashmiri. Therefore, about him it is said that he went to this eastern part of Turkestan, which we called as the Xinjiang, where he translated a large number of the Buddhist scriptures in the Sanskrit and the Pali scriptures into the Chinese languages. And his contribution was that he made the Buddhism and the Buddhist scriptures known to the Chinese people, and the Chinese rulers and the kings from time to time extended every patronage to the flourishing of Buddhism, and to that effect that Kumara Jiva was highly patronized by the Chinese kings, and so was Sangadeva. I am making a mention of Kashmir because our theme is Central Asia links with Kashmir. Therefore, I am telling this thing with that consideration in mind. And also that where India transported Buddhism, at the same time it imported Islam and mystic ideology of Sufism. And to that effect, I should say that Kashmir has had the privilege of having Sayyid Ali Hamdani, Sayyid Muhammad Hamdani, who also took up the same routes as we debated just few minutes before, and they, after traversing the most dreaded passes, the most perilous passes, after resisting the human hazards, the natural hazards, they would reach out to Kashmir while passing through the routes in search of the fame and the fortune, and most of them for the missionary purposes, some of them for the trade and commerce, and many others for the purpose of making Kashmir as a permanent abode of living. Therefore, during the medieval period particularly, we find out long and a huge train of Sufis and the saints from Central Asia came to Kashmir, and in that came Sayyid Ali Hamdani, Sayyid Muhammad Hamdani on the one hand, many others on the other, and we cannot ignore making a mention of Baqi Billah, who came with the ideology of Nur Bakhshia. Shamsuddin Iraqi also came. He came with another order to Kashmir. So means that the Sufis and the saints came with lots and lots of influences, because all the times they would not come simply as the religious missionary, but they would also carry with them the influences of the areas they hailed from. So if we find out in Kashmir the presence of the Qadriyas, presence of the Gilanis, the presence of the Badakhshanis, it is simply because of the connections that Kashmir has had with Central Asia from the medieval times and even before that as also. And not only that, we find out that along these routes, Kashmir had the occasion to bring in or to invite the large number of the artisans and the craftsmen, and we cannot ignore making a mention of Sultan Zainul Abidin, the great king of Kashmir, about whom it is said that he was a patron of arts and literature, and for that purpose that he was highly impressed by the arts and crafts of Samarkand and Bukhara, and he personally visited to the area and also sent some Kashmiri artisans and the craftsmen to the area to know the artists that were prevalent in Samarkand and Bukhara and the areas along the Amu and Sir rivers, and provided them the stipends and provided them every possible avenues and the incentives for carrying out different arts and crafts in Kashmir. And we should say that if we have the introduction of the carpet industry, the shawl industry, the metal works, the paper mache, and similar other type of the industry in Kashmir, we are highly indebted to Sultan Zainul Abidin and his efforts he put in for importing the Central Asian influences in Kashmir. And if one would like to see it, one can go through Rajatarangani of Sarivara, Juna Raja, Sukha and Prajabhata, and these accounts can give us a complete and absolute picture of the role that Sultan Zainul Abidin played in inviting the foreign artisans and craftsmen in Kashmir. And this is perhaps the reason that when Mirza Haidar Duglat came to rule over Kashmir for 10 years, he wrote Tariq-e-Rashidi, in that he writes that he was highly impressed by the arts and crafts of Kashmir, and he was highly impressed that he did not see such type of the astonishing arts and crafts in Kashmir. He could only find them in Samarkand and Bukhara and not elsewhere in other parts of Central Asia. This gives an impression that the priests and the clergy that came to Kashmir from time to time, the artisans and the craftsmen who came to Kashmir from time to time in pursuit of different intentions, they came and they made Kashmir a permanent abode of living, and during the process of the settlement they passed on their native influences, cultural influences to the people of Kashmir, and also the people of Kashmir also radiated their influences to Central Asia through these agents. And I should say that the religious exchanges in terms of Buddhism, Islam, Sufism, it did also contribute to the furtherance of the connections between India, Kashmir, Central Asia and China. Then another factor that reasonably and substantially contributed to such connections along these trade routes that we discussed was the role that the traders and the men from the commerce played from time to time. We have the complete accounts of the travelogues and the historical accounts at our disposal, which do tell us that the most adventurous and enterprising traders and men from commerce from Sindh, Balochistan, Multan, Punjab, Hoshiarpur, and many other parts of India, and Kashmir, of course, they did venture to transact in the commodities, and they would take it from Punjab onwards to Kashmir, from Kashmir onwards to Ladakh, and then onwards to Chinese part of Turkestan, and where from it would go ahead to Mongolia sometimes, and it would, on going towards the west, it would reach out to what we should say as the western parts of Central Asia. Therefore, and it is also a historical account that we have the mention of the Kashmiri traders and the merchants settling in Khotan, Yarkand and Kashgar, Samarkand and Bukhara, Taraz commercial centers as well. So do we have the instances of the Central Asian traders and merchants coming to Kashmir and settling here during the economic pursuits, during the pursuit of the trade and commerce. Therefore, these enterprising and adventurous tradesmen did take lots of risks, because they would carry with them the big caravans which were having loads and loads of the animals packed with the precious commodities, and most of the times they would reach out to the final destinations, but at times they would be caught up in the drizzling, they would be caught up in the snowstorms, and sometimes they would perish in the unaffordable the rivers as well. But that does not mean that the traders and the merchants did not contribute to the sustenance of the connections between India, Kashmir and Central Asia. And one important thing that we have to bear in mind, that these traders and the merchants were extended every possible patronage by the state, whether it was the state of Kashmir during the period of the Hindu rulers, was that of the period of the sultans, that of the Mughals or the Afghans or the Dogras. All of them extended every possible patronage to these traders and the merchants. At the same time, the Chinese government was also magnanimous and kind enough to extend similar kind of the patronage to the traders and the Central Asian rulers as well, from Khokan, Samarkand, Bukhara, Uzbekistan, or the emirs of Khokan and Bukhara would also ensure that the traders and the merchants have the hassle-free trade along the entire route, because the trade was the lifeline of the Central Asians, and after the farming it contributed maximum to the economy of Central Asia and China as well. Therefore, the efforts of the medieval as well as the ancient rulers was to extend every possible support and the help, and they would construct the caravansarais, rest houses, and they would also provide the merchants and the traders and the common people as well all sorts of the facilities in the caravansarais or the rest houses, realizing this thing, that the trade would provide them a source of transit, and that transit would help them in consolidating and stabilizing their respective economies. So in today's lecture, I am just trying to wrap up by arguing that the Central Asia, India and Kashmir were intimately connected with each other, and to that effect the several routes and several passes that entered Kashmir from different directions, through Xinjiang, through Tajikistan, through Afghanistan, through Pakistan, they played a significant role in continuing, in sustaining such type of the connections. And in that also we cannot forget that the routes were available, but there were the contributors who exploited these routes, and these contributors were in the form of the human agents and the elements, like we have the priests, the Sufis, the saints, the Buddhist monks, and we have also the artisans and the craftsmen, and equally we have had what should we say, the enterprising, the most successful businessmen and the people who transacted in trade and commerce. So in the future lectures we'll be debating upon Central Asia and China's relations with India and the role of Kashmir in those relations. Thank you very much.